Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the first session of our GFRA 2021 conference. Guido Koenig and I will be hosting this session. So I'm just going to start with a little bit of an introduction tonight. As we all know, foot and mouth disease continues to be a global problem with the biggest impact on already resource-poor countries with many other competing priorities. In poorer nations, the impacts of disease burden are often felt the most at the individual producer level, and that is often a family with a few animals that provide protein and financial stability. And as we will hear in this session, when animals cannot be used for drafting, it can also have a severe impact on food security. At the national level, foot and mouth disease impacts on the value of the export market, and that also affects producers regardless of their size. Although it's often challenging to quantify the impact of foot and mouth disease, a number of studies have shown the benefits for each dollar invested in disease control and the social improvements when animals are healthy and thriving. The global COVID-19 pandemic has in many countries diverted funds away from animal health with resultant impacts on disease surveillance and control efforts. In addition, many other high priority areas compete with resources and many other priorities compete with resources. And of course, as we know at the moment, there are also the costs that everyone has to consider to address climate change. How much this will impact on animal disease control will only be apparent in future years. However, there have been tremendous successes in controlling foot and mouth disease, especially where regions have come together in a joint approach to control. Due to the potential for transboundary spread of foot and mouth disease, we realized that the chances of success when countries that share borders work on harmonized control policies are far greater. Aspects such as vaccination, what strains to include in a vaccine, joint approaches to campaign planning, laboratory diagnostic capacity, and research support, sufficient funding to veterinary services, involvement of industries are only a few of the aspects that are essential to guarantee success. The coordination of all these aspects on a regional scale is a challenge and possible only if there is high-level government support. There are currently several such regional efforts in place, such as in Southeast Asia and China, with the Southeast Asia-China FMD campaign, which we call CCFMD, that involves 12 countries that jointly host nearly a third of the world's population and large numbers of cloven-hoofed livestock species. CCFMD is a formal OIE program that has received funding from international donors and governments since 1994, and the region has jointly developed a guidance document consistent with the OIE FAO Global Foot and Mouth Disease Control Strategy to control, prevent, and finally eradicate foot and mouth disease in Southeast Asia and China. And other such initiatives are also ongoing. But today we are going to start the conference with a success story in how foot and mouth disease can be controlled when a continent with 12 countries follows a regional approach. The Hemispheric Program for the Eradication of Foot and Mouth Disease aims to control and eradicate foot and mouth disease from the continent to the benefit of the region's economy and livestock industries. And in this session, we will hear about the recent evolution and perspectives of the foot and mouth disease situation in South America, surveillance systems for foot and mouth disease in Mexico, the challenges faced by the regional reference laboratory based at SENASA in Argentina, and then finally we will compare the foot and mouth disease outbreak in the UK in 2001 with the COVID-19 pandemic and the lessons learned. Now we are looking forward to this exciting session, and I will now hand over to my co-chair Guido to introduce the speakers. Thank you, Guido. Guido, you're on mute.
Thank you. Thank you, Vilna. Good day.
Guido, sorry, you've just gone on mute again.
Hi. I will introduce then our first speaker, who is Manuel Sanchez Vasquez. He's a coordinator for the epidemiology and foot and mouth disease areas at Panactosa, and his talk will be recent evolution and perspective of foot and mouth disease situation in South America.
Hi everybody, it is a pleasure to participate of this Global FND Research Alliance scientific meeting, where I want to try to present very briefly some of the perspectives of FND control in South America. The first thing that I want to present are the peculiarities of the region regarding the control of the FND. One of the main things that I want to highlight that the FND control, it is regarded as a regional strategy. And we have the PEFA, which is defining the action plan for a period of time. The COSALFA, which is the mechanism to review what the countries are doing and what we are doing at regional level, and that is reviewed every year. And we have Panactosa, which is where I work, which is provide the secretariat for FND control in the region. There is a high political commitment within the countries, and that allows the adequate resource mobilization. It is important to highlight that the role of the private sector, which is very actively involved, and well, particularly in the region, there is an important trade component because they are key meat exporters in the region. The FND control is based in adequate policy, both regarding the legislative aspect, but also regarding secondary legislation as the programs. The quality of the vaccine is very good, and so the vaccine strategy, the vaccine campaigns, and there are extended studies on immunity to check the post-vaccination monitoring, which is giving very good results. There is also a very robust surveillance system that includes both passive surveillance and active surveillance, and there is also an adequate system for prevention and risk analysis. Besides, there is a low risk of the introduction of extra-regional FND strains. And now I'm going to carry on presenting what has been the recent history and the evolution of the FND in this region. As we can see here, I am presenting well what has been the occurrence of the FND, the number of outbreaks. And we can see that at the beginning of the century, the first 10 years, we had still a lot of outbreaks. Many of the countries and zones were still endemic. And it's from 2010, 2011, when we start to see the disappearance of the occurrence of outbreaks of FND. And only recently in 2017 and 2018, is where we have seen the last outbreaks of FND in the region that were related to the outbreaks in Colombia. And I like to show also the occurrence of the FND, the last outbreaks, from this perspective. No? We can see in these maps the location of the last outbreaks and also related to time. So the greenness, the color, it's indicated the longer that the zone has been free without outbreaks of FND. So we can see here regarding the serotype O, how most of the region appears with dark green, indicating that the disease has been over for over 20 years, and then light green, that we know that the disease has been over for more than 10, 11 years. And the last outbreaks for serotype O, they were related to this area in Colombia, these introductions. And then also there were, within a window of 10 years, there were also still some outbreaks in Ecuador and Venezuela and Paraguay. When we look at from a perspective from serotype A, we can see that the absence of FND for serotype A has been even longer, no? We see most of the map is green, and the last episode of serotype A were related to the outbreaks in Venezuela that took place in 2013. But the rest of the region, as we can see, all green, so indicating that it has been absent for more than 10 years, and in most of the cases for more than 20 years, this serotype. And for serotype C, the last outbreaks took place in 2004 in this area of Brazil, Amazonas, and since then it has never been detected. The rest of the region, we can see that has been absent for more than 20 years, and is considered has been eradicated from the region and likely worldwide. Obviously, the presence of FND or the absence of FND has a parallelism with the recognition of the status by the OI. That is what I want to present in the next couple of the slides. So I want to show here in this map what has been the evolution from the first years of the century, 2001, 2003. What we can see, most of the region, it was gray, indicating that there was not a status. Only a few countries have the status recognized, and it has been progressively still to be recognized either free with vaccination, as is indicated with the light green, or free without vaccination, that is as is indicated by the dark green. And this is the current situation as it has been approved this year by the OIE. This is the current status in the region for the different countries. And we can see the evolution also in this graph. What we can see the proportion of cattle that belongs to areas that are recognized as free without vaccination, that green, free with vaccination, light green, and in gray the areas that didn't have a status, and how that has been progressive over the years until the current scenario where we see that 50% of the cattle in the region are in zones that are free without vaccination. 81% of the cattle are in zones that are free with vaccination, and only 4% belongs to areas that don't have a status, as it is Venezuela. And now I'm going to tackle the second part of this presentation. What are going to be the next challenges? I already mentioned that we have the PEFA, which define the action plan, define the guidance to fight the FND, and they are agreed at regional level, and define also what are the objectives and the perspectives for the region, but also what are the specific goals for the countries according to the scenario, the location, the risk, and the current situation. In the previous years, the previous 10 years, we were working on the action plan 2011-2020 that was finished last year, and now we are starting from this year to tackle the new plan, the new PEFA, the new action plan, and that is what I want to explain in the next slide. This new PEFA for the next 5 years carry on with the overall objective of eradicating FND in South America and strengthening the capacity for prevention and emergency response within the countries. And so the specific objective is to eradicate FND in Venezuela, and also to progress in the transition of the countries towards free without vaccination. So particularly about Venezuela, well, it is regarded as an infected country, that it doesn't have OIE status recognized. And what is interesting and is going to be important is that it has been recently created initiative, public-private initiative, which is called FUNVESA. And from now on, we'll be in charge of the vaccination campaigns. And we are hoping to improve the vaccine coverage from now on. It's going to be implemented also a risk-based vaccination scheme, so focus the vaccination campaigns in those areas that are perceived with higher risk. And to progress in the FND control, we are also considering doing a zoning strategy. In the next step, there will be some work to improve the passes and active surveillance and to improve the laboratory capacity. Regarding the area in the North Indian region, the Colombian borders, that we know it has been an area with moderate historical risk of introduction of FND, and they have been already implemented a strategy for zoning within Colombia, preventing particularly the introduction of the borders. So there is a strategy for zoning, separating the borders with Venezuela with the rest of the country, and also currently it is being implemented differentiated vaccination cycles according to the risk. In the zones that are free with vaccination, the plan is to move to a transition to be recognized as FND free without vaccination. For that, there is some need for some work strengthening the prevention strategies and also strategies for risk mitigation to avoid introduction and spreading of FND. Also, it's important to have a good system for early detection and rapid response within the countries. And at the same time, from Panactosa, and with the request from the COSALFA, it is creating now the vaccine antigen bank for the region, which is called Bambaco, and is going to be coordinated by Panactosa at regional level. I just want to highlight a few points regarding the transitions toward FND-free status without vaccination. The first thing to mention that it is regarded as a regional strategy. So despite countries, they make their own decisions, the overall objective is considered to be regional. And in that way, we find the countries that they are in different stages of this transition. There are some countries that they have already started with zoning strategy and stopping vaccination in some of the parts of the country. And there are other countries that they are still in an early stage of planning what is going to be the strategy for this transition. It is important to mention that it is a complex decision within the countries, because it's not only important to consider the technical aspect or the aspects related to the risk. It is also important, for example, that there is a consensus in the decision with the main actors, including the private sector. And it is also interesting that when we think about the risk assessment, there are different views, and normally the official veterinary services, they have a different perspective than the one that has been manifested by some representatives of the private sector. And I just want to give you some final remarks about this presentation. It is important to acknowledge the steady progress achieved by the countries of the region, how they have been leaving behind the risk of FND, and at the same time they have been incrementing the proportion of zones that has been recognized as FND-free with or without vaccination. It is also important that regional perspective, no, in South America, and how there is this strong commitment from the countries to eradicate the disease and to achieve that as a regional perspective. And in this context, we know that we have two different scenarios of risk. We have a different risk at the moment in the north of the Andean region, with Venezuela and the borders with Colombia, which is different from the risk in the south cone of South America, when the disease has been over for many years. And just to remind that the next priorities here are going to be to eradicate the disease in Venezuela, and also to progress in this transition towards zones free without vaccination. I always like to thank the veterinary services of the countries of the region, because they always support and we work together, and also with the private sector. And also I want to thank my colleagues from Panactosa, particularly my ex-colleague Alejandro Rivera, which was the previous coordinator of FND area within Panactosa. And with this presentation, I just want to give a brief overview about the perspectives on FND control in South America. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Manuel. And now the next, we have a next recorded talk from Roberto Navarro Lopez. This talk will be in Spanish, but with subtitles in English, and he is from the SENASICA, Servicio Nacional de Sanidad, Inocuidad y Calidad Agroalimentaria, from Mexico. He's a director of the Mexico and United States Commission for Prevention of Foot and Mouth Disease and other animal exotic diseases. This talk is called Surveillance System for Vesicular Disease in Mexico, and as he cannot be for the live session at the end on the discussion, in his place will be Jorge Francisco Cañes de la Fuente.
Esto obviamente trajo una alerta internacional entre México y Estados Unidos, por lo que ambos países decidieron tener una colaboración para erradicar el problema, conformando una comisión que se denominó Comisión México-Americana para la Erradicación de la Fiebre. Quiero agradecer a todos los presentes y en especial a los organizadores de esta reunión científica de la Alianza Mundial para la Investigación en Fiebre Aftosa por haber considerado la participación de México y en especial de su servidor en este importante evento. Mi nombre es Roberto Navarro López y soy director de la Comisión México-Estados Unidos para la Prevención de la Fiebre Aftosa y otras enfermedades exóticas de los animales, conocida en nuestro país como la CPA. ¿Cuáles son los antecedentes de esta organización? Bueno, pues nosotros desafortunadamente en 1946 tuvimos un brote muy importante de fiebre aftosa que se debió a la importación de ganado bovino procedente de Brasil, y este era un programa presidencial que tenía la idea de explotar los vastos territorios tropicales y subtropicales existentes en las costas mexicanas. Estos animales eran cebuinos que no teníamos en México. Esto obviamente trajo una alerta internacional entre México y Estados Unidos, por lo que ambos países decidieron tener una colaboración para erradicar el problema, conformando una comisión que se denominó Comisión México-Americana para la Erradicación de la fiebre aftosa. Esta comisión binacional motivó la creación en México, donde nos encontramos incluso actualmente, del Instituto para la Elaboración de Vacunas e Investigación de la Fiebre Aftosa en el año de 1947. Actualmente es un centro de investigaciones pecuarias de nuestro país. Aquí en estos lugares se hacía el diagnóstico y tipificación de los virus de aftosa, así como también en su momento de la fabricación masiva de vacunas contra esta enfermedad. Al inicio del brote, pues la decisión fue la aplicación del rifle sanitario que lo hacían personal militar, en el cual se sacrificaron más de 1 millón de cabezas de ganado nativo, que no eran propiamente animales de alta producción, sino que principalmente servían a las labores del campo, más que a una industria cárnica avanzada. O sea, estos eran de campesinos. Esto trajo como consecuencia también que al perderse la fuerza de trabajo en el campo, hubo desabastos de granos y de producción de alimentos en nuestro país. Por lo que se decidió hacer un cambio, ya que estaba ocasionando serios problemas de carácter social en algunas regiones del país. La campaña terminó resolviéndose con la aplicación de más de 60 millones de dosis de vacuna fabricadas en México. Una vez erradicado el problema en nuestro país, ambos países decidieron continuar con un programa de vigilancia, ya que nosotros tenemos una enfermedad que clínicamente es idéntica, como lo vemos aquí en la fotografía superior, que aparecía en el periódico, que decía que reaparecía la fiebre aftosa, pero que era una falsa alarma, sin embargo se trataba de la estomatitis vesicular, en la cual tenemos 2 subtipos, la Nueva Jersey y la indiana. Esto se mantuvo así hasta el año de 1988, donde nuevamente cambió su nombre para que no solamente vigilara las enfermedades vesiculares, sino otras enfermedades exóticas de los animales. Y para ello contamos pues con laboratorios de diagnóstico, pero también con la posibilidad de hacer sistemas y planes de emergencia para la activación del Dispositivo Nacional de Emergencia de Salud Animal cuando esto se requiere. ¿Qué estamos haciendo el día de hoy para protegernos contra las enfermedades exóticas? Bueno, tenemos un programa de vigilancia que le denominamos sindrómico, donde las personas nos reportan lo que ellos observan, por ejemplo, ampollas en hocico, urepatas, como lo vemos abajo, pues ellos no saben si es aftosa o estomatitis u otro problema, y para eso generamos pues muchos materiales de difusión, como pueden ver estas en carreteras, estos anuncios monumentales, pósters, trípticos. Tenemos un boletín que emitimos mensualmente donde hablamos de las enfermedades en México y las enfermedades exóticas, videos sobre lo que significa la vigilancia sindrómica, y el año pasado generamos una aplicación denominada Vice para todos los tipos de celulares que existen, donde pueden bajar de manera gratuita la aplicación y registrarse y poder hacer notificaciones que nosotros recibimos en tiempo inmediato, y lo atendemos en menos de 24 horas cualquier reporte de una enfermedad exótica. También iniciamos con un programa también muy importante para promover la notificación. En nuestro país existen cientos de farmacias y clínicas veterinarias en el sector rural de todo el país. Hay organizaciones de productores, veterinarias, etcétera, que nosotros les llamamos puntos de contacto, y tenemos una relación estrecha con ellos. Tenemos sus datos, bases de datos. Tenemos actualmente cerca de 14,000 puntos de contacto, de acuerdo a lo que ven en este mapa por entidad federativa, y entregamos este aviso que ustedes ven ahí en amarillo, donde dice que si una vez presentan, por ejemplo, ampollas en hocico, urepatas, en rumiantes, deben de ser notificados, y ahí están los teléfonos del médico más cercano, local, a cargo de la vigilancia de enfermedades exóticas, del coordinador regional, y también de nuestras oficinas centrales para recibir notificaciones. También el año pasado lanzamos ya cursos en línea sobre el reconocimiento de las principales enfermedades exóticas de los animales, que incluye un ejercicio de simulación sobre fiebre aftosa. Actualmente hasta esta fecha se han abierto 16 aulas para 56 instituciones que son académicas, de investigación, de universidades, de colegios de médicos veterinarios, y teniendo una participación de 5.797 personas, de los cuales ya 3.089 obtuvieron su constancia correspondiente, y esto se genera de manera automática. Bueno, una vez que recibimos la notificación, para ello tenemos 8 coordinadores regionales en el país. Nuestro país sanitariamente tiene esta división. Tenemos 88 médicos veterinarios especializados en el reconocimiento de enfermedades exóticas para la toma de muestras y envíos a los laboratorios, 115 vehículos de apoyo para la atención de notificaciones, 117 líneas de telefonía celular para la coordinación del personal operativo y disponibilidad de material y equipo para atender una contingencia en cualquier parte del país. Una vez que nosotros recibimos una notificación, pedimos a veces que nos manden, o la recibimos por la aplicación Avise, fotografías. Nuestro personal acude al campo, obtiene las muestras, y para el diagnóstico contamos con un laboratorio certificado de alta seguridad, nivel 3, en la Ciudad de México. Aquí en la Ciudad de México tenemos, además de este laboratorio, un laboratorio de serología, un laboratorio de inmunología, biología celular y molecular avanzado, y estamos construyendo, y esperamos que lo tengamos para diciembre, bioterios y unidades de aislamientos 3 y 3AG, y esto nos va a convertir en el Centro Nacional de Referencia de Enfermedades Exóticas y Emergentes de los Animales de nuestro país, además de 11 laboratorios de biología molecular que tenemos distribuidos en el país. Para el diagnóstico, pues regularmente hacemos los ensayos interlaboratorio con la OPS-OMS con panaftosa. Ahorita estamos por recibir ese panel para el diagnóstico. Siempre lo hemos aprobado de manera satisfactoria, pero también tenemos pruebas armonizadas con los laboratorios de referencia que nos corresponden de nuestros socios comerciales, como es el laboratorio de Plum Island en Estados Unidos y el laboratorio de Winnipeg en Canadá. Esto es lo que normalmente recibimos como notificaciones. Vean que a septiembre ya tenemos 90 notificaciones de enfermedades vesiculares en el país, y el año pasado tuvimos 85. Esto seguramente se va a incrementar arriba de lo que obtuvimos en el año 2017. ¿Y qué encontramos con esta vigilancia sindrómica? Bueno, en estas 90 investigaciones, pues 41 han sido negativas, y en las otras hemos encontrado diferentes enfermedades. Como pueden ver, ninguna de aftosa, encontramos una de fiebre catarral maligna en bovino, uno de lengua azul en bovino, estomatitis vesicular indiana, no hemos tenido ningún caso este año. En Nueva Jersey tenemos 24 detecciones, un caso de diarrea viral bovina y 4 casos de estomatitis papular bovina y 18 casos de ectima contagioso. Entonces creemos que tenemos un buen nivel de vigilancia que se mantiene desde prácticamente 1947. En conclusión, pues quiero mencionarse que la Comisión México-Estados Unidos para la Prevención de la Fiebre Aftosa y otras enfermedades exóticas de los animales, conocida como CPA, posiblemente sea la única organización mundial dedicada exclusivamente a la vigilancia de enfermedades vesiculares de los animales y de otras enfermedades exóticas de importancia al comercio nacional y a la salud pública. Lo que yo conozco de muchos países es que los propios servicios veterinarios que hacen las campañas sanitarias pues atienden cualquier reporte que pueda haber. Sin embargo, nosotros tenemos ya todo un sistema de calidad establecido, porque ese es prácticamente el trabajo que desarrollamos, y esta organización tiene una gran experiencia en este sentido. Bueno, pues espero que esta información haya sido de utilidad. Muchas gracias nuevamente a todos los organizadores.
Hi, everyone. I remind you that you can write down your question on the chat in the conference hall, and then we will follow with our next speaker, which is Sabrina Caldo-Novo. She is from SENASA, Servicio Nacional de Sanidad y Calidad Agroalimentaria de Argentina, and his talk is Current FMD regional situation, ongoing projects and challenges within the FMD OIE reference laboratory at the Laboratorios Regionales en Campos Experimentales de la Coordinación de Gestión Técnica, SENASA.
Hello, everyone. I would like to greet you and welcome you to the 6th Global Foot and Mouth Disease Research Alliance Scientific Meeting, and thanks to the organizing committee of CIFRA 2021 for the invitation and giving us the possibility of participating and showing some of the activities, some part of the activities that we do at SENASA. We are very glad that the CIFRA has been held here in Argentina. Sadly, we will have to wait until 2023 until we see all us together, back together, tête-à-tête, as French guys say. And nevertheless, this year has been very productive. This is the 3rd time that we are in contact again in order to discuss relevant issues in relation to foot and mouth disease virus. It has been a difficult period, and some kind of light is arising, visualizing the starting period of COVID-19 control. I hope so. We have lost many loved people during this time, and I would like to remember them all in these words. I have not much time, so I will shortly introduce some of the activities that are ongoing at SENASA FMD OIE Reference Laboratory in relation to the current FMD regional situation, ongoing projects and challenges within the FMD OIE Reference Laboratory that actually works at the biosecurity for OIE level at the General Direction of Laboratory and Technical Control from the National Agri-Food and Animal Health Service, SENASA, in Argentina. So, as you may know and have heard in the previous talk, the regional situation is more than satisfactory. But we do not have to forget that FMD is always a latent threat, especially due to the particular situation that FMD continues replicating in some areas of the world. In case of an event for the region, for the American region, it will signify an important economic loss, not only due to the direct losses, but most of all to the indirect losses. As we all know, foot and mouth disease has a rapid antigenic drifting as long as as the virus replicates, and we have to have in mind that there are always new emergent strains that what is something to take into account, as Dr. King has said in many previous presentations, is that we are seeing some from the last decade transpool movements of strains. So as you can see here in the OIE official FMD status map, the America region is free from foot and mouth disease. We had some issues to be solved, particularly in the north of the Andean region. But we have new upcoming challenges at the region due to the Plan PEFA that it is expected by 2025 to end with the vaccination in the whole region. So the PEFA plan has three main outgoals, and one of them is completing FMD eradication, as I have said before, so mitigating the north of Andean region risks. So this is going to be performed, strengthening the prevention and response capacity of veterinary services in the countries of the continent. And as a third and final and the most important stage is making the transition to the official disease-free status without vaccination in the disease-free countries that actually maintain vaccination. Sorry for the, I missed a letter in the last paragraph. So here you can see a map, and it is expected, for example, by 2023 that Brazil will have all the country free from vaccination. This make us show us the need of working in some particular areas in order to strengthen veterinary responses and being prepared for what it comes in the future. So in the case of Argentina, Argentina has a lot of many kilometers from the north to the south. We have the country is for the case of the country, it's all free from FMD, but as you may see, there is a north area at the north of the 42nd parallel that is free with vaccination, and a south area at this parallel that is free without vaccination. This is the actual situation, but the National Service for Agri-Food Health and Quality, SENASA, as the national control organism, in particular the FMD OIE reference laboratory, has among its relevant functions to carry out activities to contribute in-depth knowledge of the viral strains characteristics that are actually circulating in extra regions, and has to be prepared not only, as I said before, for the improvement and maintenance of the status of the country, but also for eventual response in consonance with this regional future implementation. So I have posted here what we routinely do as day-to-day activities and the topics in which we offer continuous training. We work, you all know us from some years ago, from many years ago, I would say, but we work in the direct and indirect diagnosis of FMD virus techniques. We also have a specific area that works in the characterization of FMD strains that actually circulate in different spots in the world. We work in three principal characterizations that include genetic, antigenic, and biological behavior characterization. The third biological behavior characterization is focused on studying the capability of the strains and the conditions the strains have to be scaled up in order to evaluate if they would be possible candidates for adding them into the Argentinian Antigen Bank. We have a specific area of reagent production, and we also have a special team that works in vaccine control, complying with all the vaccine controls that are recommended in the FMD chapter of the terrestrial manual of OIE. We also offer training, advice in interpretation of experimental tests and official status results. And here I have added some, not all, of the activities that we have performed, especially during this last year. We have been offered annual virtual training in vesicular diseases sampling. We have prepared training videos for education and delivery of technical information. We are working on the maintenance and actualization of the Argentinian Antigen Bank. We are working also on FMD high-potency vaccines. We are performing studies, particularly with the aim of the replacement of in vivo studies and in vivo challenges, and considering as a goal the TR concept implementation. We have been working and have new outlines for working in new safety tests with new safety vaccine tests with molecular detection assays evaluating the replication rate. This is in particularly in order to stop working with the mouse model, and we are also working in more sensitive cell lines. And the idea of the assay with molecular detection by studying the decrease of the replication rate is also to gain more sensitivity than the complement fixation that has been performed during all these years after the safety test by cell isolation. We are optimizing protocols have been working also some years ago, 2 or 3 years ago, and optimized protocols for guinea pig hyperimmune sera production, always considering the TR concept. And we also continue, as you may know, working on the characterization studies of strains responsible for emergencies in extracontinental regions and new vaccine formulations. I have added as a final step some of the national and international, not only regional, also overseas collaborations we have. One that is still pending the ending by December 2021 is with the APQA of South Korea. We have been working in the correlation of antigenic mass and VNT ELISA titer, both in pig and bovine animals. This is part of one of our most important goals that are related to the replacement of in vivo challenge tests. We have also ended a bilateral cooperation with Vietnam that is related to genetic and antigenic characterization of Vietnamese circulating strains between 2010 and 2019. We have some part of these results that are going to be presented in the poster section, so I hope you enjoy it. And we have a pending manuscript for publication, and we are very, very glad to announce that together with work of with the Chancellery, we have a new upcoming network collaboration between Vietnam and Argentina. We also have collaborations with INTA in Argentina for understanding the cross-reaction response between heterologous strains of FMDB in the bovine model. We have always been collaborating and continue collaboration with some manufacturers like Biogenesis Bagot in biological strain studies and characterization of them, and development of reagents for rapid diagnosis response and vaccine control. And for example, with the laboratory CDB, we are collaborating on production of reference sera. So I would like to thank you all again. Thank you for hearing this session. And of course, I would like to thank all the team, all the people that is behind these activities that work day to day in order to do all these activities, and in order to assure the animal health status in Argentina, and the collaboration and networking with the rest of the world. And of course, we are available for any question you may have. You have our emails in case you want to contact us. And we hope to receive, we are open to receive any collaboration of interest you may have. Thanks, thank you very much, and see you during the meeting.
I just want to reiterate what Guido said before and remind all the participants that you are very welcome to post your questions in the chat box. We will have a discussion session after the final talk of the session, and but we are reliant on your questions so that we can have a very nice and active conversation afterwards. So it is now my absolute pleasure to introduce the final speaker of this session, and it is Keith Sumption, who's currently the Chief Veterinary Officer of the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. He's also the leader of the Animal Health Program and the director of the Joint Center for Zoonosis and Antibiotic Resistance. We, of course, all know him very well from his previous role as the Executive Secretary at the EU FMD. And Keith has always been a great support of the GFRA and has played an absolute pivotal role in the control of foot and mouth disease. So we are really very, very honored tonight to have, well, today, to have Keith present on the parallels, differences and lessons, a comparison of the management of foot and mouth disease and COVID-19 using the UK as an example.
So firstly, may I thank Alejandra and Francisco and the GFRA leadership for their kind invitation for me to speak at the start of the GFRA conference. It's indeed an honor. 1 year ago, with David Payton, Theo Knight-Jones, and Melissa McLaws, we published a paper comparing the two epidemics that brought the United Kingdom to its knees, the FMD epidemic 20 years ago and the COVID-19 epidemic last year, and continuing into this one. Anyone who was involved in the UK 2001 epidemic immediately would have seen the similarities at the start of last year. So in this brief overview, I want to do three things. First, recall the UK 2001 epidemic and consider the parallels. Second, consider the lessons from UK 2001 that should have informed the management of COVID-19. And third, consider where we might be a further 20 years' time. Firstly, in terms of the two epidemics, when FMD was confirmed in February 2001, the UK had not had a mainland outbreak for 33 years. almost no vets and few farmers had any practical experience. FMD was first suspected by a vigilant vet at an abattoir on the 19th of February, but compared to COVID, he probably had no prior warning that there would be a disease to look out for. Over 2,000 outbreaks were recorded by the time the disease had been eradicated at the end of September 2001. Over 6 million animals had been culled, as well as an unknown number of livestock, comprising circa 12% of all UK livestock. Over 2,000 premises, 1% of the susceptible holdings were infected across 44 administrative divisions. At the height of the crisis in April and May, over 10,000 vets, soldiers, field and support staff were engaged in fighting the disease, and up to 100,000 animals were slaughtered and disposed of each day. The control by slaughter was met by public shock and disbelief. To stop movements by people, the countryside was effectively closed to visitors. To manage the enormous disposal of carcasses, the army was employed and mass burial sites were constructed in each region for the over 6 million carcasses that resulted. In total, about 7% of UK cattle and 15% of UK sheep were culled. The general election had to be postponed, and at the end of the general election, the Ministry of Agriculture was itself moved under the Department of the Environment. With COVID, there was a similar timing in terms of starting off in February, and also a similar time really to the first major peak in terms of the cases. The maximum number of cases per day across the entire time until now was about 80,000, which is well less than the number of animals killed every day at the height of FMD. With COVID diagnostic testing, it took 7 months to build up to the peak of 500,000 tests per day. With foot and mouth disease, in around the same time, Pirbright and other labs managed 200,000 tests per day 20 years earlier. In both cases, the ramping up involved a huge logistical effort. In both cases, critical supplies were limited the ability to ramp up the diagnostic chain, which makes us wonder, should we be doing things and planning for things together in terms of animal emergencies? So comparing the two, you can see in this picture here, the immediate impact of FMD. The takeoff was very, very steep. With COVID, after the first proven transmission in the UK, there was a similar rise in cases, but there was the warning signs of the initial cases before transmission. The situation that we compared last year now needs to be seen into the whole. We were looking at a window that was until the end of September. Now, when we see the subsequent waves, we realize that the number of cases per day has been higher and proven to be higher in later cases, in the later situation. But the number of deaths, the real shock was the mortality rate as it developed in March through to July last year. So in terms of parallels and warnings, there were warnings in 2001. There were warnings relating to COVID. In the UK 2001 case, in the preceding 2 years before the epidemic, had seen spread of the O. Pan-Asia strain into 3 countries. And in the 2 months before the UK was affected, the EU FMD issued warnings. While these clearly did not prevent the cases happening, we cannot say that they had no impact at all. The Pirbright Institute, for example, was well aware of the risks. Preventing virus entry is next to impossible when infection pressure is high. Being ready does not mean preventing every case, but it does mean having the plans tested and the resources for the expected cases. With COVID, the first cases on 31st of January occurred within a month of the first warning signals. With FMD, a fatal delay of 4 days occurred between the first case and the national lockdown of animal movement. In this 4 days, the infection was carried all over the UK. And it was estimated that had the movement ban for FMD been imposed on the 20th of February, the day the disease was confirmed, the final epidemic would have been reduced by 1/3 to 1/2. National lockdown had not been used before. for FMD in the UK. With COVID-19, a national lockdown of human movements had also not been seen or used before, and was introduced almost 2 months after the first case, a shorter time after the first transmission, but still a gap between the first proven transmission and the national lockdown, and only after other countries such as Italy had led the way. History does not look kindly on delayed lockdowns. Consent and support is needed in advance. There is no time in an emergency to negotiate a lockdown. A second similarity is really how the leadership was taken by surprise. In 2001, the leadership was caught unprepared, veterinary as well as political. The narrative quickly became of an outbreak that was out of control, and veterinarians lost the confidence of the political leaders. Leadership became centralized and became a battle over the numbers and how they would be portrayed. The projections of modelers convinced many that the veterinary policies were inadequate and that wider culling of animals was needed. History was repeated with COVID. The same modeling teams, often from FMD 20 years earlier, were employed. The initial efforts to contain infection were abandoned as the numbers grew and cases outstripped capacity. The policy became to buy time, delay the worst. In both FMD and COVID, the limited capacity for diagnostic confirmation was a severe issue. In both cases, the modeling did not include vaccination. In the UK by choice, because for FMD slaughter was the policy, and in COVID-19 because vaccines at that time had not been developed. Which brings us to the point. Epidemic modeling itself is insufficient. It really needs to be connected to resource availability and models that include the impact of having the resources available or a shortage of resources at the critical time. With FMD, it's taken about 10 years to create these models, and with the EU FMDIS model, another 10 years, so that we have those models increasingly in our hands for FMD. But with COVID-19, the resource modeling had to be built in on the hoof. Another comparison and lesson is that for contingency planning, we really have to consider the worst cases will happen and prepare for them. When the European Union countries stopped routine vaccination in 1990, it was based on a worst case scenario of 2,000 outbreaks in the whole 10 years after cessation of vaccination. So stopping vaccination was not a disaster. Thanks to EU FMD, EC, the EU members, the outbreaks were small and limited until UK 2001. The UK epidemic was actually the worst case that had been predicted, the 2,000 outbreaks, all in one incursion. The lesson of this is that worst cases do happen, and we have to somehow avoid the groupthink, the influence of the majority that will say the worst will not happen when we do contingency planning. How do we do that? Well, we have now to consider very seriously for COVID and similar pandemics that might come along. Are we prepared? Do we test for the worst cases? Do we really seriously open our contingency planning to outside scrutiny? Because even the countries that rated themselves for pandemics to be prepared according to the indicators suffered very badly and catastrophically, in fact, in some cases, from COVID-19. Another lesson is that the exit strategies matter at the beginning. The public needs to know what will happen after the immediate phase. Now with FMD, the story there was that the vaccine was never used in the UK, and that was in part because the exit strategy was so unclear, and in many ways the farming community was not convinced to support the idea of vaccination when the exit strategy was not in place to know that they would be able to their businesses could be resilient. So it can take years to regain lost markets, and that loss of confidence that could come at the beginning of an epidemic, if we're not sure of the exit strategy, is very important. With the same with COVID, the question at the start began to be, what will be our exit strategy? Will it be herd immunity? Will we learn to live with the infection? Will we live in in a way which is in balance. Now, some of those things probably could be foreseen what would happen with the likely difficulty to truly contain infection, but the public needed to be part of that discussion. There were other parallels and similarities in terms of behavior changes that were needed in the personal level to understand biosecurity and how we would apply it, both in FMD and in COVID, and also in terms of virus evolution, how viruses continued to move and develop quickly during the epidemic. We do need also to very much think about why epidemics become so huge. Now, in the case of FMD, the most important super spreading events happened before the index case was detected, and livestock markets, particularly markets of sheep, were seen to be important. The most significant five events of the transmission that drove the scale of the epidemic took place before the epidemic was first detected. Now that means that we have to be thinking well in advance of the first case as to the factors that relate to the scale of epidemics. There are many other things which are interesting and similar that need to be considered. One of the major things here is the importance of understanding how infection reaches animals, and also the important part of the preclinical respiratory shedding, which for FMD and for COVID-19 are important. With FMD, maybe it took 100 years to really understand when the transmission truly takes place. With COVID, it all had to be done extremely quickly after the first cases. But now we understand that this window of pre-symptomatic preclinical infection may be extremely important. And it's been estimated that around 50% of new SARS-CoV-2 infections have been attributed to exposure to asymptomatic or pre-symptomatic individuals. Think of the sheep in 2001, going through markets, preclinical or asymptomatic, and involved in super spreading. We have parallels there. We do also have some differences. We've had such a long time in FMD, but maybe a limited number of people to look at all the experiences of managing outbreaks, the epidemiology, the transmission. With COVID, we had a matter of a month or more to understand the basic transmission. There's an all of society behavior change and stay-at-home policy. And that, although in FMD, such a lockdown was imposed for livestock movements and the public were affected, there wasn't the financial support that enabled people to get on with their lives in 2001, whereas we've been fortunate to see quite a lot of that in 2020. The individual sanitary status has become very important for being able to move around the world, move even between areas of a country. That's a difference also with FMD in terms of international movements, and perhaps also the scaling up of diagnostic capacity, how much of the private sector provided that rather than the state in COVID-19. And I wonder also if a difference is in acceptance of endemic infection in the case of COVID-19. Is that because endemic infection is really the norm in human health? So now we consider what changed after the UK 2001. Well, a number of things have changed. The UK's control strategy changed, stipulating that a national movement ban would be implemented at the beginning of any FMD outbreak. There was a development of combined modeling for epidemics together with resource modeling. And perhaps some of the other major things internationally would be that despite the interest to have a global eradication campaign in the immediate couple of years after the UK 2001, as avian influenza came along and became a much bigger public health threat, so those thoughts faded, and the thoughts instead turned to how can we progressively increase the control of FMD. And the progressive control pathway, which I was part of initiating, was an attempt to help countries to get on the ladder to improve their disease control, and has become part of regional roadmaps, has become part of a global strategy. There are also practical measures to reduce the risk of incursions, such as a complete ban on swill feeding in the EU. Another change was the establishment of GFRA, and I'm so pleased to see that it's active to these days. There was, in the GFRA initiation, a great emphasis on development of new vaccines. And we can see that that in COVID is very similar, except the rate of investment is so enormously higher with COVID vaccines. And it wasn't really with FMD until a couple of years when something like an advanced market commitment arrangement has been proposed and funded to try to stimulate new vaccines to be developed. Perhaps the changes were limited in other areas, such as real change in sanitary status, and in terms of the barriers to the use of vaccination in endemic settings and in emergencies. And in emergencies, we still cannot use preemptive vaccination ahead of cases, and the economics of vaccination to live are not equalized with the slaughter policy. So in terms of 20 years after COVID, well, I hope that we'll see a rate of change which is very much greater than we've seen with FMD. There is, as we speak at the moment, a huge interest and placed and a huge important place on building back better and preventing, preparing and responding to future pandemics, with the G20 taking the lead to really consider how that will be financed at a scale that is needed. So in 20 years' time, will we have no more zoonotic pandemics in the similarity to COVID-19? Perhaps as a result of greater restoration of our ecosystems and One Health being implemented in each of those high-risk areas where there might be an overspill of zoonotic viruses? Will we see stress testing for countries to ensure that their preparedness is really up to the international norms and fit for pandemics, including our cooperation between agencies and in terms of delivery of financial support to countries in pandemic situations? Will we meet the target of 100 days, which has been taken as one that we should be aiming for, 100 days to develop emergency vaccines and get diagnostics ready, with a global coordinated system to ensure that happens? Or will there be, as we had with FMD in 2001, a partial achievement through underfunding and because other emergent political priorities, including the need to address climate change, takes the funding away or limits the national investments needed? Will we still have inequalities in national health systems? That's probably likely, but that needs to be addressed by the way that we respond and support those countries. There must be positive impacts. There must be impacts also overspilling between the great emphasis now on new vaccines and the possibilities for FMD and other vaccines. And I hope we see more integrated national responses considering animal epidemics as well as human ones. So my final message really is in terms of the need to consider One Health as the issue that is the quality of the interdisciplinary, intersectoral approach to addressing common problems in animal health, human health, and environmental health. It's essential that we have investment in animal and plant health for the people and the planet if we're going to both prevent future pandemics, but also to ensure that we build a planet which is healthy in every way in our food systems. So One Health is our health. We all are working in it. FMD is one part of the entire animal health burden, animal health disease burden. And that's important not only for itself, but because controlling FMD is also a way of making sure we can control other diseases, including the zoonotic ones. And that is essential. So thank you very much for this opportunity, and I wish you a very, very good conference.
Thank you very much, Keith. And welcome to all our presenters. So we are now going to try and address as many of the questions that we can in the time that we still have left over. But again, just want to thank all the speakers for their talks and the time that they've put into it, and having to watch themselves give their own talks. That must be quite the experience. So Guido, can we please go over to you to maybe just do the first question, please? Yes, we have some questions, so I will ask the speakers to be concise with these answers. But I remember you that you can contact all the speakers during the entire conference. So if we can go with your question, please contact them later. So we have one question for Manuel. Now that the scenario is most of South American countries are free of foot-and-mouth disease, I have two questions for you. Why cannot the other countries pool their resources and aid Venezuela to control and eradicate the disease? And the second question is will the Bancabo also contain antigens relevant for strains circulating in Asia and Africa?
Thank you, Guido, for the questions. The first question about Venezuela. Yes, that is something that it has been tried before. Actually, a couple of years ago, there was some vaccine donated from Brazil, and it was released in Venezuela to be to be implemented, not applied in the herds there, and okay, at some point was successful, but sometimes the help from the countries need to go beyond that giving vaccine. What we need also in Venezuela is infrastructure to be able to arrive to the farms and to apply the vaccination. So at the moment, and I mentioned that the strategy for the vaccination in Venezuela has changed with the FUNVESA, that is a private public partnership, and from this year they are in charge of the vaccination. So we are with from Panactosa, we are working very closely with them and with some countries from the borders to see how we can coordinate all those resources to help Venezuela, particularly in this moment in the vaccination. As I have explained, the focus, given that the resources are limited and the circumstances in Venezuela are complicated, so we are particularly focused on the vaccination and be successful or improve the coverage, particularly in some areas. So yes, we are taking that, and we are requesting help and resources from some countries, not only from the public sector, but also from the private sector. And that is what is happening at the moment. The second question was about Bambaco. Yes, at the moment, well, it has been discussed over the years, and it seems that it's going to be closed soon with enough countries to be part of that in the region. And still, if the strains that will be included has not been decided, that will be the first exercise of the technical team in Bambaco. But I can foresee that the idea of Bambaco is to include extra-regional strains in the bank.
Thank you, Manuel.
Thank you. Sabrina, there's also a question for you. How do you standardize the capture and detection antibodies in your hyperimmune sera for the vaccines not included in the vaccines? So I guess it's the vaccine strains not included in the normal bank.
Yes, Vilna, I understand that they are referring to the new production of hyperimmune sera for controlling vaccines containing extra-regional strains that we are actually not using. We are now at this moment working on that. We are working on the production and we are working on the standardization. We are making different trials and we still do not have results, but we have made some experimental tests, and the idea is controlling this new type of vaccines containing extra-regional strains, working on molecular detection for typing it, and with the detection of this sera, hyperimmune sera, working on complement fixation tests. As the complement fixation test has not an optimal sensitivity, the idea is starting working with what I commented before, with a molecular detection curve. The idea is comparing in parallel the detection that has the hyperimmune sera for the complement fixation test and detecting with RT-qPCR test a curve of decreasing of the replication, the possible replication in an iniquity test. If they are referring to a possible iniquity test or an identity test, I'm not sure if I'm getting the idea of the question very well.
Thanks, Sabrina. Yeah, I think the person who asked the question would probably also contact you, and you can clarify that further.
Yes, of course.
All righty. Guido, anything from your side?
Yes, we have one for Keith now. Which disease do you consider more contagious, FMDB or SARS-CoV-2? And do you consider the virus or virus epidemiology important in that evaluation?
Well, that's a very, very interesting question. I mean, I think we have to recognize both infections are multi-species. I mean, FMD with over 80 species that have been affected. Of course, not all of them are going to be production animals, but I think we have a difference in the level of aerosol transmission over distance between FMD and SARS-CoV-2, which is important for the potential for a runaway, an explosive outbreak through the aerosol transmission routes of animals exposed, ruminants exposed, often from infected pig farms, which makes potentially FMD far more infectious to a population, even in a lockdown situation, than really would be the case with SARS-CoV-2. But we have a very different situation because, of course, we cannot completely stop, even if we've tried human movements. So therefore, that level of preclinical, asymptomatic and symptomatic transmission has clearly been impossible to contain, even with the most rigorous. So it's hard really to sort of directly compare. We can imagine that what would happen if SARS-CoV-2 was more infectious to pigs or to traded species. We would have a greater impact. We did have some impact by the fact that it transmitted to mink, but in many ways we were lucky in the situation that we didn't have a coronavirus that also had a major domesticated animal source. Thank you.
Thank you. Jorge, we have a question for you. I mean, we, of course, are all very concerned about the impact of COVID on the animal health control policies and the fact that resources may be removed from animal disease surveillance to be applied to help deal with the COVID situation. Can you maybe give us an overview of what the impact had been in Mexico in terms of the COVID situation?
Well, really, the impact in Mexico of SARS-CoV-2 or COVID-19 has not really been on resources, because as Dr. Navarro stated, we are an organization specialized in transboundary and emergent diseases. We have our own resources. Yes, there has been a cut in the financial aid, but we have managed to manage it and work with what we have. The impact has been more on the people, not wanting to let the epidemiological investigators in, not wanting to allow us to see the animals, to enter in their houses, to go to some towns, because they are afraid of they may get infected. It's more the hysterical situation and the fear of getting infected with COVID than with resources. I think that's more the impact, and the fact that not too many people are going out to buy medicines, to look for a doctor for the animals, etc., etc., etc. I hope I answered that question.
No, thank you. Very, very interesting. So it was more the fear of people going out and being received. That's very interesting. Sorry, Keith, did you want to say something? I think I may have interrupted.
No, not at all. Thank you.
Okay.
No.
I think we have time for one last question for Sabrina. Introduction of South American vaccine strain in Southeast Asia will complicate the already compromising vaccine matching system with different manufacturers and different strains going around?
I don't think it will complicate the vaccine matching system. If it refers to the detection of the immunity that the South American vaccine strains produce in the Asian region, because they can be perfectly identified. Maybe, I don't know if I'm getting the point. I'm getting to the point of the question, but there are no inconvenience in identifying with which vaccine strains are the animals vaccinated. Maybe in relation to the first question, I don't know who the person was, but we can get in touch and we will show the internal controls for the hyperimmune sera production.
Guido, I think we've reached the end, haven't we?
Yes.
Do you want to just thank everyone?
I will first of all remind everyone that we encourage all of you to go to the Gather Town in our website, and you can see there the videos of our sponsor. You can see the poster room also, and you can go to the coffee room and go and take a chat with everyone in the conference in this coffee break minutes. Okay, so you can contact also the speaker if you find there and in all the conference. So thank you everyone for staying here, or for our speakers for this rich conversation. That's all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you, see you.